that like the historical background of it was basically this guy's prophet's son got turned into a sheep, so that
Turn into a sheep.
like
Turn into a sheep.
A sheep or a ship?
Okay, are you familiar with, those of you who are Catholic / Christian, are you familiar with the story of Abraham being forced to sacrifice his son Isaac?
Yeah.
Right? So there's an analogous story, perhaps even the same story, probably the same story, right, in the Quran, right? So the Hajj, or basically, yes, it talks about the pilgrimage, right, but they sacrifice sheep or animals, right, to give out meat to the poor in remembrance of that event, right? Okay, correct me if I'm mangling it. Okay, I don't think he was turned into a sheep.
I think it's a sheep, right?
Yeah, but he was asked to sacrifice his son, right?
Yeah, but then he couldn't do it, so God turned him into an animal. I
You
think
think?
it's a sheep. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I don't know. Okay, sure. I'm not going to question you. So when it comes to the question of is racism real, you need to acknowledge that people don't have knowledge about specific cultures, and they're not made to have knowledge about specific cultures, and as a result, these stereotypes still exist. There are still more pernicious forms of racism, but obviously the minorities here are not as oppressed as, for example, the African American community in Western countries or in the US. Right? There's no like police brutality, like racial segregation, or like police screening based on a racial basis. Okay. However, there are stories like, for example, the last time I had a Chinese girlfriend, we were in a shopping center. Old man literally comes up, says, "You are a blood traitor." Tells her in Chinese, "You are a blood traitor. You are disgusting. You are a whore." Blah blah blah. And I understand a fair bit of Chinese, so I was quite shocked. So those sort of things still exist today. I mean, you read about the Gojek story, is it because I'm Chinese? And it's only because, if you think about it, right, that particular incident, why did she make that comment? Okay? Because she saw the driver talking to the Cisco officer in Malay, right, and felt as though she was being ganged up on. Okay? So you could possibly justify her reaction, okay? But it stems from a fear of minorities, okay, and a fear that she was being exploited or harmed or like unfairly persecuted in some way. But B, it's isolation, and it's the same sort of isolation that minorities face on a day-to-day basis when some of you decide to converse with each other in Mandarin. Okay, so I don't know whether kids today still do that. Right? To my knowledge, most of you still prefer speaking in English. But for me, growing up, that was a thing. It was a big deal because my friends refused to communicate in English because it was easier to communicate in Mandarin. Right? And that same sense of isolation, a lot of minorities go through because of the refusal to speak a common language in social situations where you're not required to. Right? So even though we perhaps might place importance on celebrating all languages and using English or Singlish as a common language for everyone, the fact is that there are power dynamics associated with what sort of languages are used commonly. Okay? You see the same things in the media. Okay? For example, it is very common during your New Year's Eve countdown show to have Chinese singers, but not any other race, right? Singers singing in Mandarin, but nothing else, right? So you have singers in English and singers in Mandarin. The same is for advertisements. I ask you to go and observe advertisements from now on, and observe how many of them are predominantly Chinese, right? You look at your condo advertisements, your aircon advertisements. I always look at them and like, why is it only a Chinese family? You mean minorities don't buy aircon? Like, so this is prevalent throughout the media industry. Okay, so again, it's not like straight, flat out racism, but it's all these small things that I think we need to have a discussion of and to have to forward the discussion and to eventually get some real change. So, to answer the question of the integration policies and whether it truly worked, knowledge of these specific scenarios, right, and these specific challenges basically allow you to criticize or to present the failures of these policies, right? Like why integration in schools don't necessarily work all the time. And the same for an ethnic quota in HDB flats. Like you're not forced to interact with your neighbors because it's no longer the kampung days where everyone goes into each other's houses and celebrates everything together, right? Most of the time you don't even talk to your neighbors in the lift, right? And disputes between neighbors are far more common than you realize. There was a case maybe about 7 years ago, I would say, about curry, neighbors cooking curry, and one family couldn't stand the smell of curry. Like, of course, it turns out there was I think, Chinese expat family that didn't like curry. I don't know any Singaporean that really doesn't like. But again, these situations happen, right? So, microaggressions you need to be familiar of. The next thing is this concept of Chinese privilege, right? Privilege. What?
I buy the Chinese privilege.
You buy the Chinese one now?
Privilege.
Oh, yeah, lah.
Okay, so just a bit of backstory. This term supposedly was coined by this activist called Sangeeta Tanapao, who is a mad woman. Okay, is this being live?
Yes, but unlisted.
Unlisted, okay, fine. Yeah, so I'm gonna say a lot of things. Yeah, she's just like crazy, like, so imagine the feminazi, like kind of like ultra left wing, like just doesn't make sense kind of person. Yeah, she's that, right? So unfortunately, that does not give a lot of credibility to the concept of Chinese privilege, but it covers a lot of the things that I've mentioned earlier, right? The fact that people who are Chinese speaking are favored and have favorable treatment in a lot of small instances in life, right? This also extends to things like jobs. Okay, it is, I don't know whether it's legal, but it's definitely not enforced. The fact that you can advertise a job that requires Mandarin speakers only, right? And it's fairly common. Okay, even if it's not explicitly advertised, the fact that the vast majority are Chinese, and therefore it's easier to develop a connection with someone who is Chinese speaking, right, of that same culture, who looks like you, who acts in a certain way, who understands where you're coming from, understands your value system, things like that, means that it becomes very easy to provide preferential treatment for individuals who are of the same race. Okay, so that's where the concept of Chinese privilege, loosely translated from white privilege, comes over. I mean, I think white privilege is a lot more far-reaching and covers a lot more instances of like attribution of wealth and how the power dynamics come into play. I don't think that is as translatable in the Singapore context, where you have minority representation in the government, right? But it does matter in terms of the sort of representation that occurs within the corporate world, right? Especially those, like the richer individuals tend to be overwhelmingly Chinese, right? And that means that they do hold a significant amount of influence and sway, right? That is also one of the reasons why Section 377A is still not repealed, particularly because the rich Christian Chinese community, right, refuses
To budge.
or like, you know what?
Refuses to budge?
Yeah, like
Is it?
or actively lobbies the government to basically actively lobbies the government to keep 377A around, right? one instance in which this influence can be perhaps attributed to is the debate about hijabs for uniformed women in the civil service. There was a debate, I want to say 5 years ago maybe, right, about whether hijab should be allowed for police officers, for example, or anyone working like in uniform services in the civil service, right? And the government basically said, no, it's not required or not important, gave some sort of weak-ass answer. You can go and read up about it. The theory behind it is interesting, right? Because the Sikh community, right, has turbans allowed in the army, in the police force and like, right? But why not the Malay Muslim community? And it has to do with two reasons. One, things that have been inherited from the British. And two, again, power dynamics in terms of the ability to lobby government, right? The Sikh community is far richer and far more influential, even though they are really, really small, than the Malay Muslim community as a whole, right? So in terms of policies that can be passed, in comparison, prominent individuals within the Chinese community did and still do express reservations when interacting with someone who wears a hijab, because it's a very visible sign that you are religious, right? And if Hakim